Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the explosive reports that came out in the Observer yesterday regarding the Road Haulage Association angrily writing to Michael Gove about an alleged 68% drop in exports since Brexit at the start of last month. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So I'm actually going to start off with a tweet from someone on this matter, on the 68% reduction in exports, Dmitry Grozobinski. Now, he said, confidently predicts the inevitably imminent debate over whether the 68% figure is accurate, representative and indicative of long-term trends will be an unbearable and pointless distraction from the real people and businesses who need help right now. Now, I sort of agree that discussion about, the 68% and what it means exactly would absolutely be a distraction from actually tackling the problem for people who can tackle the problem. After all, it's not a debate about whether it's 68%, 60%, 50% or even 0%. There is a problem. There has been a massive drop in exports, that is clear. And arguing about the nth degree or what percentage is it exactly isn't constructive. It doesn't matter. The fact is, it is too large for our economy to maintain. That being said, I discussed yesterday, I think, the concept of how the government could improve, trade between Britain and Northern Ireland on that occasion, and yet we're adopting a position that would do exactly the opposite of that. The same applies for trade between Britain and anywhere else in Europe, quite frankly. So I am going to start with this 68% because, my background is mathematics and my brain inevitably asks a question. Whenever I see a headline like this, whenever I see a stat like this, a percentage, what exactly is that 68% and how did you arrive at it? Is it 68% by volume or by value? I'd be very surprised if it could be by value because at the end of the day, those figures won't be available for some time. There are other ways you could arrive at a percentage if you were going to be a bit creative as well. Also, how was it arrived at? Compared to last year? Compared to an average over the past 5 years? What's the baseline? Now, you read the article and what is clear is that the figure is supposedly volume. So, okay, it's about volume and it's based on the Road Haulage Association after a survey of its members. Okay, so it could never be anything other than volume. But at this point, you can absolutely say that that 68%, if it mattered, if it's accurate, could be put under the spotlight. But this is where I come back to that tweet. Arguing the toss about the 68% doesn't fundamentally matter. What is clear is that exports are way down. The Transport Secretary last week tried to say that trade was nearly back up to where it was compared to last year, because there are now about 6,000 lorries passing through Dover each day as opposed to the 7,000 that we usually have. But that's to ignore a few little facts. First of all, Dover is by far our most important port, of course, but it's not the only one. You'd also have to look at what's going on elsewhere. I had a little look at Immingham yesterday, for example. You'd have to look at what's going on at the ports between Britain and Northern Ireland. But the other fact he's ignoring is that most of those lorries are empty. You can't just count the lorries if they're not carrying goods. Yes, as I've said before, some lorries would be empty anyway, even normally, but it's way, way higher. A vast majority of them now are empty. So you're counting a lorry as stuff being exported, but there's nothing in there. Nothing's being exported. It's a very poor measurement. We know that trade isn't anywhere near back to normal, because business groups are haranguing the government to do something because their members are facing financial ruin. And here's the other problem I have with just comparing it with last year. At the moment, you could say, okay, all right then, that's okay. I'd still prefer it as like a 5-year historical thing as 1 year. But what's going to happen as we go through the year? The government are obviously going to keep doing that. They'll keep comparing it to last year, which means at some point, we'll be comparing it with a year in which exports were hit by COVID, at which point comparing it to the previous year becomes a completely useless baseline. Richard Burnett, the chief executive of the Road Haulage Association, so I've kept a bit of a tab on him through last year. He said that he'd repeatedly warned ministers about the problems for months before Brexit, and that is certainly true. because I did a number of videos last year talking about his specific warnings, and it was very evident then that the government were not taking them seriously. They weren't even involving these major stakeholders in the project. You know, I've been teaching with my engineering group recently, project management, and the importance of engaging with stakeholders and categorising stakeholders according to interest and power. The government completely ignored all these lessons. It was, as a project management exercise, Brexit was the way not to do it. You know, the problem, I think, is that for senior ministers, senior members of our government, Brexit is purely political. They don't see it any further than that. All of the arguments for Brexit are political, not practical. They can't be practical because it's not practical. So because they don't see Brexit as being a tangible thing, it's a philosophical idea, they're not capable of dealing with the very real problems that emerge from it because, well, they would need very real solutions. And it's a cult, isn't it? You know, just as you can identify cult behaviour, one good way to identify cult behaviour is to say to someone, okay, you know, the leader of this group, criticise them. Because anyone can be criticised. And if a person can't criticise their leader, they're not a supporter, they're a cultist. And you can see the cult of Brexit in an inability to accept downsides as well. Because even if you thought Brexit was overall a good idea, every change has its downsides. What are the downsides? If we were to rejoin and someone were to ask me, well, Phil, what would be some of the downsides of rejoining? I can give you some. They pale into insignificance compared to the benefits, but I can give you some. But these people cannot accept any downsides. It's because it's a cult. And if you can't accept the downsides, and you just view them as teething problems, because now that they're real, they can't deny that they exist. We were always going to get to this point. They can't deny they exist. So now what do? They call them teething problems that will go away. But the problems will persist because they're not teething problems. You know, someone who'd actually worked for the Conservative Party in the past was also regarding this article, tweeting that the party will never again be able to say it's the party of business. You know, this is something that I absolutely think Labour need to seize on with all haste as well. I cannot see how this is going to avoid becoming a major political storm in a few months, and Labour need to be, or the opposition in general, but Labour needs to be on the front foot on this one. Because even if you accept the Tories' crap about, oh, we had to go through with Brexit, you know, will of the people and all that, which is crap because they haven't been honest at all about what it meant. But even if you believe that, even if you believe, well, we had the referendum, we had to go through with it, you would still say that it's the government's job to have protected our businesses from the worst effects. You know, there were different forms of Brexit possible. What we got was almost the hardest possible. You know, it has stopped some businesses being able to operate altogether. They've just been shut down. It has reduced the capacity of many others to do business, and it has put up the transport costs for those who can still trade normally or near enough normally. It doesn't matter whether exports are down by 10% or 68%. They are significantly down, in fact 68% massively down on where we would be if we'd have had a softer Brexit. If we'd pursued the more pragmatic Norway or Swiss style Brexit that all the Brexiteers were banging on about before the referendum, then we would not have seen this hit to our trade. You know, hauliers are angry, along with the traders who form their customer base, of course, because not only is the government doing nothing to improve the situation, but they know it's going to get worse. The general public may not, but they know it is. Because as I've said several times this year already, we're not currently carrying out checks on imports. All the checks at the moment are for exports, all of them. You know, the already ruinous checks are only one way. From July, we are supposed to start carrying out checks on goods coming into the country as well. Now, I have to say, I am not at all confident we're even going to be in a position to do that. But what I do know is that that is going to create a massive, massive problem. Without tangible improvements to the system, the situation is going to become hellish this summer. It will inevitably lead to people trying to find alternative suppliers from their own side of the Brexit borders. This can't be done overnight, or it already would have, but we will inevitably see movement in that direction. People will attempt to find suppliers on their own side. And as I've been saying for a long time, the issue with changing suppliers is you don't tend to change back when the situation improves. And our side of the Brexit border is a lot smaller than the other side. Our side is just England, Wales and Scotland. The other side is everywhere else. And you know, the other side is literally a sizable chunk of the world's wealth. Rejigging supply lines is a huge net loss to Britain. It also adds yet more pressure onto the United Kingdom itself. Because, you know, if we source, for example, suppliers within Britain, okay, that's great, but what does it do for it might be good for that business, but what does it do for Britain in general? Nothing, because we're selling to ourselves. We don't make money that way. Whereas on the other side of the border, you've got lots of different countries and they can sell amongst each other, and they are making. At what point do people start to realise that the way Brexit is trashing our economy isn't down to teething problems? At what point do they see that although some issues will get better, some people will get better with the paperwork, the net effect is for the situation to get worse? You know, because not all of Brexit has been implemented yet. It's coming in by stages. And all of this was known, except I would say for one thing. So I'm not an economist. I rely on my information from experts who have carried out competent analyses and seem independent. As I looked at the picture from before Brexit, you know, last year, so the way it was emerging in terms of economic analyses, Brexit was going to do more harm to our economy than COVID. Absolutely, definitely going to do more harm. But it looked like it would, the hits to our economy would be shallower and for longer. And that meant, in theory, it was possible to hide the damage of Brexit behind the more urgent crisis of COVID. And yet, and I don't know what it'll have done to the economy yet, because we won't get the figures until next year. But in terms of the disruption, it's been massive, more so than COVID. Brexit has already reduced our levels of trade below that of COVID from last year. The short-term impacts of Brexit do actually seem to be very severe. And if the government aren't able to hide Brexit behind COVID now, and they really shouldn't be able to, given what we've already seen and what we're going to see over the next few months, then where do they go from there? They surely can't tough it out. So presumably they'd have to start implementing some real solutions, because these are real problems. They're not going to be solved without real solutions. Now, those solutions will inevitably involve more alignment with the EU, not threats of divergence. That's what's potentially on the table here. And I think it's why it's important that as many of us as possible are able to focus people's attentions to what's going on. Because the more pressure there is on government to do something, the more likely they are to actually do something and not just talk about doing something. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.